Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is the 1921 Cleveland Tigers NFL football season. Again, the Tigers were playing in the National Football League. This was the second year of the NFL, although at that time it was called the American Professional Football Association. The Tigers finished in 11th place with a record of 3-5. The home games in Cleveland were played at League Park, at that time known as Dunn Field. Now for the overall standings, the first place team was the Chicago, Illinois / Chicago Staleys, who were 9-1-1, and they would be declared champions. There was no championship game or playoffs. They were declared champions the following spring. Second place team, the Buffalo All-Americans, were 9-1-2. Third place, the Akron Pros, 8-3-1. Fourth place, the Canton Bulldogs, 5-2-3. Fifth place, the Rock Island Independents, 4-2-1. Sixth place, the Evansville Crimson Giants, 3-2-0. Seventh place, the Green Bay Packers, 3-2-1. Eighth place, the Chicago Cardinals, 3-3-2. Ninth place, the Dayton Triangles, 4-4-1. 10th place, the Rochester Jeffersons, 2-3. 11th place, the Cleveland Tigers, 3-5. 12th place, the Washington Senators, 1-2. 13th place, the Cincinnati Celts, 1-3. 14th place, the Hammond Pros, 1-3-1. 15th place, the Minneapolis Marines, 1-3. 16th place, the Detroit Tigers, 1-5-1. 17th place, the Columbus Panhandles, 1-8. 18th place, the Louisville Brecks, 0-2. 19th place, the Muncie Flyers, 0-2. And 20th and last place, the New York Giants, who were 0-2. The season started for the Tigers on October 16th. They played the Columbus Panhandles and won 35-9 in Cleveland in front of 3,000 fans. The next game was the Cincinnati Celts. Again, they won 28-0, again in Cleveland at Dunn Field. The next game, they played the Dayton Triangles in Dayton, lost 3-2 in front of 4,000 fans. Then they played the Buffalo All-Americans in Buffalo, lost 10-6 in front of 3,000 fans. Then they played the Canton Bulldogs, lost 7-0 in Cleveland in front of 3,500 fans. Then they faced the Decatur, Illinois Chicago Staleys, lost 22-7 in Chicago at Cubs Park in front of 8,500 fans. That was followed by a game against the New York Giants, which they won 17-0 in New York at the Polo Grounds in front of 3,000 fans. Then they played the Washington Senators, lost 7-0 at National Park in Washington, D.C., again with 5,000 fans in attendance. In the 1921 season, there was the planning meeting in April of 1921 in Akron, Ohio. Joe Carr, the manager of the Columbus Panhandles, was named the new NFL president. And Joe Carr would be NFL president from 1921 until his death in 1938, so 17 years. He had good judgment, was willing to make decisions. He was optimistic about the NFL. Most teams were in financial difficulty. In 1925, Carr was also the president of the American Basketball League. The 1921 Akron Pros had halfback Fritz Pollard, who was in the NFL, and their star end was Paul Robeson, who was also a famous opera singer and a famous communist activist who visited the Soviet Union and promoted the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union. The Decatur Staleys lost their first 2 games in Decatur, Illinois, but then played their last 10 games in Chicago, Illinois. In 1921, the Cleveland Tigers, Jim Thorpe came as a player coach, and he brought fellow American Indians from the Canton Bulldogs, teammates Joe Guyon and Pete Kallock. The new NFL commissioner, Joe Carr, fought to stop NFL teams from using disguised college players and tried to stop players from jumping from team to team during the season. The Cleveland Tigers disbanded after the season. This was the end of that franchise. I'm reading a fine book. The title is Curly Lambeau, The Man Behind the Mystique, by David Zimmerman, 2003. 1921 was the first year for the Green Bay Packers in the NFL. Lambeau Field in Green Bay, where they currently play, was named after Curly Lambeau. He organized the Green Bay Packers at age 21. He was the captain and coach for the first 31 years of the Packers, and he was also a player from 1919 to 1928. Curly Lambeau's Packers won 6 NFL titles: 1929, 1930, 1931, 1936, 1939, and 1944. Lambeau was inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1963. Lambeau was a college football player at Notre Dame under coach Knute Rockne. 1919, Lambeau formed the Green Bay Packers as a company team for the Indian Packing Corporation, a meat packing company. The 1921 season, Lambeau was a player-coach, quarterback, and kicker. In the first game, he kicked the game-winning extra point. So for the Cleveland Tigers, Jim Thorpe, as we said, was the player and head coach. Thorpe was a left offensive halfback and left defensive halfback. He was 6'1", 200 pounds, 33 years old. He went to the Carlisle Indian School. He played in 5 games, started 3, scored a touchdown. Jim Thorpe was born in 1887 near Prague in the Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. He died in 1953 in Lomita, California at age 65. He was a pro football player from 1915 to 1928 for the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Bulldogs, Marion, Ohio Oorang Indians, Rock Island Independents, the Tampa Cardinals, and Chicago Cardinals. He was an MLB baseball player from 1913 to 1919 for the New York Giants, Cincinnati Reds, and Boston Braves. He won 2 gold medals at the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm, Sweden, in the pentathlon and decathlon. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and College Football Hall of Fame. He was a member of the Sac and Fox American Indian Nation, first president of the NFL from 1920 to 1921. The 1921 season, Thorpe left the Canton Bulldogs and became the player-coach for the Cleveland Tigers. Thorpe played in 5 games, scored a touchdown. I'm reading another fine book, Path Lit by Lightning, The Life of Jim Thorpe by David Moranis, 2022. In 1915, Thorpe joined the Canton Bulldogs in the Ohio League. Thorpe was world famous from the 1912 Olympics and gave pro football more popularity. This was the biggest development so far for pro football, Jim Thorpe going pro. He had been very successful at the Carlisle Indian School, which played college teams. The NFL was founded in 1920. Jim Thorpe's fame made the establishment of the NFL possible. Jim Thorpe was considered the greatest football player of all time in 1921. He was 34 years old and his football skills were diminishing. His fame as a great athlete and football player was solidified thanks to sports writer Grantland Rice. Jim Thorpe. Now the rest of the players, Harry Baujan was a right offensive end, right defensive end. He was 5'8", 170 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Notre Dame. Played in 4 games, started 3. Played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1920 to 1921. This was the end of his pro football playing career. Harry Baujan. Phil Bauer was a quarterback, safety, left defensive end, left defensive guard. 5'8", 160 pounds, age 27. He went to college at Middlebury and Dartmouth. He played in 4 games, started 3. Bauer was born in 1894 in Richmond, Virginia, died in 1975 at age 80. And his pro football career was just in 1921 for the Cleveland Tigers. Phil Bauer. Ed Browley was a right offensive guard and right defensive guard, left offensive guard and left defensive guard. He was 5'9", 175 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Holy Cross, played in 5 games, started 3. Browley was born in 1894 in Boston, Massachusetts, and died in 1956 in Peabody, Massachusetts at age 61. He played football in 1921 for the New York Giants and Cleveland Tigers. Ed Browley. Pete Calac was a fullback linebacker, 5'10", 196 pounds. He went to the Carlisle Indian School in West Virginia Wesleyan, Played in 8 games, started all 8. In 1921, he scored 3 touchdowns. Kalak was born in 1892 in Valley Center, California, and died in 1968 in Canton, Ohio at age 75. He played pro football from 1916 to 1926 with the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Tigers, Union Quakers, Washington Senators, Marion, Ohio Oorang Indians, and the Buffalo Bisons. 3-time Ohio League champion in 1916, 1917, and 1919. And he was a good friend of Jim Thorpe. Pete Kalak. Art Corcoran was a left offensive end and left defensive end. He was 5'11", 184 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and Fordham. Played in 8 games, started all 8. In 1921, he scored a touchdown. He was born in 1894 in Boston, Massachusetts, and died in 1958 in Chelsea, Massachusetts, at age 63. He played pro football from 1919 to 1923 with the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Tigers, Akron Pros, Buffalo All-Americans, and Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. They called him Bunny. He played pro baseball in 1915 for the Philadelphia Athletics, just got in 1 game. He was a college football coach at Holy Cross in 1932, and he had a receiving touchdown for the 1921 Tigers. And he had a passing touchdown in 1922 for the Akron Pros. Art Corcoran. Milt Gee was a quarterback safety, 5'7", 167 pounds, age 30. Went to college at Dartmouth. Played in 5 games, started 4. In 1921, he had 2 rushing touchdowns and 1 passing touchdown. He played pro football from 1916 to 1921 for the Canton Bulldogs, Hammond All-Stars, Chicago Tigers, and Cleveland Tigers. He was born in 1891 in Wilmette, Illinois, and died in 1975 in Vallejo, California, at age 83. 2-time Ohio League champion in 1916 and 1917 for the Canton Bulldogs. In 1917, Gee threw 17 touchdown passes. He was All-Pro and helped the Bulldogs win the 1917 title with a touchdown pass to Greasy Neal in a win against the Detroit Heralds on Thanksgiving in front of 8,000 fans. 1964, a Sports Illustrated article wrote that Gee pioneered use of the huddle in 1917. Milt Gee. Joe Guyon was a right offensive halfback and right defensive halfback, 5'10", 194 pounds, 29 years old. He went to the Carlisle Indian School and Georgia Tech, played in 6 games, started all 6. He was born in 1892 in White Earth, Minnesota, and died in 1971 in Louisville, Kentucky, at age 79. He played pro football from 1919 to 1929. The Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Tigers, Washington Senators, Marion, Ohio Oorang Indians, Rock Island Independents, Kansas City Cowboys, and New York Giants. For his career, he had 7 rushing touchdowns in the NFL and 2 passing touchdowns and 1 receiving touchdown. They called him Big Chief. He was an American Indian from the Ojibwa or Chippewa Nation. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1966 and the College Football Hall of Fame in 1971. He was born on the White Earth Indian Reservation, and he went to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. His college football coach was Pop Warner at Carlisle. In the games against Army, Dwight Eisenhower, who would later become U.S. President, was ejected for manhandling Guyon. In college football, as a player at Georgia Tech, his head coach was John Heisman, for whom the Heisman Trophy is named. At a night practice, Guyon would give out blood-curdling war whoops from his Indian culture. 1917, Georgia Tech was national champions. In the game against Vanderbilt, Guyon rushed 12 times for 344 yards and an 83-0 win. He won an NFL title in 1927 with the New York Giants. He was a coach at Union University Bulldogs in Jackson, Tennessee in 1919. He was a coach in 1920 for Georgia Tech. He coached high school football at St. Xavier High School in Louisville, Kentucky from 1931 to 1933. He was a minor league baseball star from 1920 to 1936. Hit 343 straight years for the Louisville Colonels in AAA ball. He was a head baseball coach for the Clemson Tigers from 1928 to 1931. He was a baseball manager in the minors for the Anderson Electrics, Asheville Tourists, and Fieldale Fowlers. Joe Guyon. Bruno Haas was a left offensive halfback and left defensive halfback, fullback, linebacker. 5'10", 180 pounds, 30 years old, did not go to college. He played in 8 games, started 5. He was born in 1891 in Worcester, Massachusetts, and died in 1952 in Sarasota, Florida at age 61. He played pro football from 1921 to 1922 for the Cleveland Tigers, Akron Pros, and Dayton Triangles. In 1921, he had a receiving touchdown. He was an MLB pitcher in 1915 for the Philadelphia Athletics. And his baseball career lasted 37 years. He had an MLB record, 15 walks in 1 game in his MLB debut. In the minors, he played baseball until 1938, 12 years for the St. Paul Saints from 1920 to 1931, also for the Winnipeg Maroons. He was a manager in the minors and scout for the Philadelphia A's. In 1915, with the Philadelphia A's, he was 0-1 with 7 strikeouts and an ERA of 11.93. Bruno Haas. Johnny Hendren was a left offensive halfback, left defensive halfback, right offensive halfback, and right defensive halfback, fullback, and linebacker. He was 5'9", 182 pounds, 24 years old, went to college at Bucknell, played in 5 games, did not start any. He was born in 1897 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and died in 1964 in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, at age 67. He played pro football from 1920 to 1921 for the Canton Bulldogs and Cleveland Tigers. In 1921, with the Tigers, he had a rushing touchdown. He was in the U.S. Army in the First World War in France and was wounded in action. Later, he worked as a salesman for the U.S. Rubber Company. Johnny Hendren. Al Jolly was a right offensive tackle and right defensive tackle. 6'2", 220 pounds. He was 22 years old, went to college at Kansas State in Marietta. He played in 1 game, did not start. They called him Rocky. He was born in 1899 in Onega, Kansas, and died in 1948 in Marietta, Ohio, at age 48. He played pro football from 1921 to 1931 for the Cleveland Tigers, Akron Pros, Dayton Tigers, Marion, Ohio, Oorang Indians, Buffalo Bisons, Brooklyn Dodgers, Cleveland Indians. He was a Native American with the Wyandotte Nation. He was an NFL coach in 1929 for the Buffalo Bisons and in 1933 for the Cincinnati Reds. Al Jolly. Burger Lowe was a right offensive tackle and right defensive tackle for the 1919 Cleveland Tigers and 1921 Cleveland Tigers. Burger Lowe. Player name Moore, no first name indicated, was a right offensive tackle and right defensive tackle. He's deceased, and he played in 1921 for the Cleveland Tigers, played in 1 game and started that game. Player name Moore. Joe Murphy was a right offensive guard and right defensive guard, left offensive guard and left defensive guard. He was 5'9", 215 pounds, 24 years old, went to college at Harvard and Dartmouth, played in 6 games, started all 6. He was born in 1897 in Concord, New Hampshire, and died in 1940 in Manchester, New Hampshire, at age 43. And his pro football career was just in 1921 for the Cleveland Tigers. Joe Murphy. Dan O'Connor was a left offensive tackle and left defensive tackle. He was a right offensive guard and right defensive guard. He was 6'2", 210 pounds, age 27, went to college at Boston College and Georgetown in Washington, D.C. Played in 5 games, started all 5. He was born in 1894 in Manchester, New Hampshire. Died in 1964 in Boston, Massachusetts at age 69. He played pro football from 1919 to 1921 with the Canton Bulldogs and Cleveland Tigers. Dan O'Connor. Player named Patterson, no first name indicated, was a quarterback, safety, center, and middle guard. He played in 2 games, started both. He is deceased. And his pro football career was just in 1921 for the Cleveland Tigers. A player named Patterson. Red Perlman was a left offensive guard, left defensive guard, left offensive tackle, and left defensive tackle. He played in 8 games, started all 8, and he played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1919 to 1921. Red Perlman. Ed Stahl was a left offensive guard and left defensive guard. He played in 1 game, which he started, and he played for the Cleveland Tigers from 1919 to 1921. Ed Stahl. George Tandy was a center and middle guard. He was 6'1", 210 pounds, 28 years old, went to college at North Carolina. Played in 3 games, started 2. He was born in 1893 in Franklin, Illinois. Died in 1969 in Springfield, Illinois at age 75. pro football career, he played for the 1919 Detroit Herald and the 1921 Cleveland Tigers. George Tandy. Ralph Waldsmith was a center and middle guard, 225 pounds. 31 years old, went to college at Akron, played in 4 games, started all 4. He was born in 1892 in Akron, Ohio, and died in 1925 in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania at age 32. Played pro football from 1915 to 1922 with the Canton Bulldogs, Akron Indians, and Cleveland Tigers. They called him Fat. He won an NFL title in 1922 with the Canton Bulldogs. In 1914, he was in the Ohio League with the Akron Indians. He played under Newt Rockne. He was a 2-time Ohio League champion with the Canton Bulldogs. In 1990, he was a coach and co-owner of the Akron Indians and signed Fritz Pollard as the first black NFL coach who is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And he's in the University of Akron Sports Hall of Fame. Ralph Waldsmith. Tommy Whalen was a right offensive end and right defensive end, center and middle guard, left offensive guard and left defensive guard. He was 5'10", 180 pounds, 27 years old, went to college at Dartmouth and Georgetown in Washington, D.C. He played in 8 games, started 7. He was born in 1894 in Lynn, Massachusetts, and died in 1957 in Boston, Massachusetts at age 63. He played pro football from 1919 to 1921 with the Canton Bulldogs and Cleveland Tigers. In 1921, he had a receiving touchdown. In 1919 and 1920 with the Canton Bulldogs, he had 2 titles with Jim Thorpe. He played pro baseball in 1920 for the Boston Braves, was a first baseman. He was the coach, athletic director, and principal of Lynn English High School in Lynn, Massachusetts. An academic wing in 1990 was named after him. In the 1930s, he was an umpire for several summers in the Cape Cod Baseball League. People said he was very encouraging and positive. Tommy Whalen. Now, in January of 1922, the NFL Executive Committee decided that the Chicago Staleys were the 1921 NFL champions. The Staleys needed to move from Decatur to Chicago to get enough fans to pay the bills and meet payroll. Eugene Staley sold the team to George Halas, player-coach, and the team later name was changed to the Chicago Bears. In 1921, the Staleys played at Cubs Park and negotiated with Bill Veeck Sr., president of the Chicago Cubs baseball team, father of Bill Veeck Jr., who later owned the Cleveland Indians. George Halas was a player-coach, and the 1921 Chicago Staleys was the first of George Halas's NFL championships. So that's the story of the 1921 Cleveland Tigers and the 1921 NFL season. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.